Hast du auch manchmal das Gefühl, dass das Leben nur so an dir vorbeizieht? Dass du in einem mentalen Hamsterrad läufst, wo du die eine Sache erledigst, das eine Projekt abgeschlossen hast, aber im Kopf irgendwie schon längst wieder beim nächsten bist? Dass du einen Schmerz erleidest zum Beispiel oder einen Verlust, der einfach wehtut, aber irgendwie hast du das Gefühl, dass keine Zeit bleibt, um dieser Veränderung in deinem Leben wirklich Raum zu geben, sie voll und ganz zu erleben. Ich weiß, das sind keine einfachen Fragen, mit denen ich da jetzt auch ein bisschen so meine eigenen Knöpfe drücke. Ich kenne das selber sehr gut und damit herzlich willkommen zu 1000 First Steps, deinem Podcast für das Größte in dir. Mein Name ist Jakob Horvath und ich freue mich so sehr, dass ich mit Schildkret einen Interviewpartner im Podcast habe, der uns jetzt dabei hilft, auf diese Fragen eine sehr, sehr praktische Antwort zu finden. Und diese Antwort lautet Rituale. Schildkret hat vor wenigen Tagen sein neues Buch herausgebracht mit dem Titel Hello, Goodbye, 75 Rituals for Times of Loss, Celebration and Change. Ein Rezeptbuch für Rituale, wie er es selbst nennt. Ist der Gründer der Bewegung Morning Altars, wo er sich auf künstlerische Art und Weise mit Ritualen zu Themen wie Vergänglichkeit, Verlust und der Liebe zur Natur beschäftigt und dort mehr als 60.000 Instagram-Follower erreicht und dazu inspiriert, dem Alltäglichen wieder mehr Bedeutung zu geben. Das Interview mit Schildkret hat mir wieder gezeigt, wie sehr wir es wirklich jeden Tag und jeden Augenblick selbst in der Hand haben, unserem Leben einen Wert zu geben und es dadurch besonders zu machen.
So it's the made thing that makes it real. Same thing is true with ritual. You can't think ritual. You have to make ritual. You have to do it. And that's the difference between something kind of being an abstract meaning and it actually meaning something to you is when you make it real. And so I think that's a very key word when it comes to meaning. You make meaning. And anything can be meaningful.
Das heißt, alles, absolut alles kann Bedeutung haben, wenn du ihm Bedeutung gibst. Und Rituale helfen uns dabei, die Wegpunkte und die Meilensteine in unserem Leben zu würdigen, Schmerzen zu fühlen, Veränderungsprozesse bewusst zu erleben und so unserem Dasein eine tiefere Bedeutung zu schenken. Und weiß, wovon er spricht. Seine Mutter, das beschreibt er im Interview und auch in seinem Buch auf sehr berührende Art und Weise, seine Mutter, die an Alzheimer leidet, hat ihn vergangenes Jahr zum ersten Mal gefragt, "What was your name again?" Die eigene Mutter vergisst den Namen. Beschreibt es im Interview als eine sehr schmerzhafte Veränderung, der er sich da so bewusst wie möglich zu stellen versucht. Mit persönlichen Erfahrungen aus seinem Leben bringt uns Schildkret die Bedeutung von Ritualen näher und wie wir sie in unseren Alltag integrieren können. Wir sprechen auch über die große globale Veränderung, die wir gerade erleben, über die Transformation des menschlichen Bewusstseins und wie wir ihr liebevoll begegnen können. Und auch das ist ein sehr, sehr spannender Punkt, den Schildkret da anspricht. Unsere Kultur befindet sich in einer Zeit des Vergessens und der Ablenkung.
Forgetting is human. We all forget all the time. That's normal. But we don't have many of us don't have these mechanisms to remember. To remember what? To remember that our life is important, that it's sacred, that we're connected, that we matter, that we're changing, that we belong. I mean, fill in the blank.
Yes.
But we forget all of the time.
Ich hoffe, dass dir dieses Interview so sehr dabei hilft, wie es mir geholfen hat, dich wieder zu erinnern. Daran, wer du wirklich bist, an deine Verbindung zu allem und jedem und an den bewussten Umgang mit einer großen universellen Wahrheit, dass sich alles im Leben verändert, immer und überall, dass nichts so bleibt, wie es ist. Alle Links zu Schildkret, zu seinem Buch, zu seiner Website, zu seinem Instagram-Kanal findest du in den Shownotes und ich wünsche dir jetzt ganz viel Freude mit diesem Gespräch mit Schildkret. Take a deep breath in taking that deep breath in and out before starting an interview is my little ritual before actually starting an interview. And I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today, Schildkret.
Thank you.
Welcome. The reason I'm mentioning this is because we will talk about rituals a lot today, and I'm very much looking forward to that. A few words about you just as an introduction, and then I'm totally giving it over to you. You are an author. You are the founder of the movement Morning Altars. I have a big following on social media on that one, and I'd love to hear more about what this is about. It's one of your heart projects that you've been pursuing for quite a long time, actually, already. And you recently,
or more so, it's been pursuing me, I think is a better way of putting it. But yeah,
it's been pursuing you. I like that. And recently, your new book has been published, and we have talked about it a couple of days ago, and I could really feel your excitement. It's called Hello, Goodbye, 75 Rituals for Times of Loss, Celebration, and Change. And you on your website, I remember you wrote something about meaning, actually a lot about meaning, but this particular quote stuck with me. Our culture lacks meaning, and my work in this world is to create it.
Yeah.
So I think that is sums up really well the bottom line of what your work is all about. Let me ask you as an introductory question, what has the most meaning to you at the moment in life?
I mean, has the most, I'd say, if I had to boil it down to meaning, I'd say the thing that has the most meaning is my life. You know, and really, if you had to boil that down even more so in the time of the pandemic, I'd say, like, what's the most meaningful right now, especially that my best friend just told me she got COVID, is my health. So I'd say health, both of my life and everything around me, the health of everything is the most meaningful, is the most important. The question of how do you maintain health? How do you nourish health? How do you keep healthy? These are different questions, but you know, what's the most meaningful and important for us as a species, for our planet, for me as an individual, is health.
And I think for many of us, especially these days where health cannot be taken for granted anymore. I mean, it obviously has never really been, but these days, I think more and more people are waking up to the reality that it can be taken pretty quickly. Values as health, freedom. And suddenly we're faced with this reality of change. Even more than usual. I mean, it's like usually happening anyways, right? But we are not like faced that straight with it. You were about to say something on this one.
Well, I was going to say, you know, the things that you just mentioned are, you know, for instance, like health. I think that it's important to remember always, but especially now, that none of these things are autonomous. For instance, my health, me as a healthy person, is not possible without the health of everything around me. So I can't be healthy if I'm drinking, you know, bad water, or if I'm breathing bad air, or if I'm around, you know, like toxic waste or whatnot. I mean, so my health is inherently tied to everything else. And the word, you use the word freedom too, and that's true as well. I can't be free if everyone around me isn't. So my own freedom is tied to the freedom of everything around me. So they're not mutually exclusive. And I think that's a very hard thing for us as individuals in a Western modern based culture to really understand, because we are addicted, or really the narrative of the culture is that, you know, individualism is the pinnacle. And, you know, when it comes to ritual and health and meaning and all of the things that I am devoting my life to, it's really the antithesis of an individualistic culture, which says that, we're all tied together in this, that what you're going through right now is not, it's not isolated experience. What you're experiencing is not isolated. People have experienced that before you. People will experience that after you. And there's a lot of markers. There's a lot of, people have made meaning of these kinds of times and of these transitions in our lives before us. And we can essentially, really connect ourselves into those resources, not do it alone.
It's understanding that in change, in loss, in these seemingly very difficult and heavy, and if we judge it, negative things, negative aspects of life are actually meaningful too, if we open up to it. And as far as I understand it, your book, and it comes out in a time where a lot of people face that reality, is to encourage and also to give people really concrete tools and rituals at hand that they can work with, and that then they can find that meaning in everyday lives.
It's not so much finding it, it's about making it. And there's a very big difference in that. For instance, I'm an artist, right? I don't particularly, sure, I could find inspiration, but the question is, what do I do with it? And the difference between a non-artist and an artist is that I make art with my hands. I'm taking something from my imagination and bringing it into the world with my hands, right? And so it's the made thing that makes it real. Same thing is true with ritual. You can't think ritual. You have to make ritual. You have to do it. And that's the difference between something kind of being an abstract meaning and it actually meaning something to you, is when you make it real. And so I think that's a very key word when it comes to meaning. You make meaning, and anything can be meaningful. I could take some soil from the ground, crumble it, drop it, and that can mean nothing, or it can mean everything. I could wash my hands with water. That could mean nothing. Or if I make meaning of that, that could be a huge moment of release or relief or grief. So it's really about, what do you make? And this is where my job for the last 15 years as an artist comes in. I wrote a book on ritual, but really I wrote a book on ritual as an artist, because I'm encouraging people to use their imaginations, their hands, their mouths, their bellies, their feet, to make meaning, inherent creativity in that, which I think in a time where we really give that over to, influencers and corporations, and, we really release our power of being creative to other people. I'm encouraging my reader to reclaim that in the space of meaning making. You can do it. It's not the job of the religions. It's not only certain cultures that get to make meaning. We all have that capacity, just like we have that capacity to make food. Food and ritual are very tied together. You can't think food. You've got to make food. Right? So the same things with ritual, and it's not, one culture doesn't get to just make food. Everyone has to eat. That's how we nourish our souls. Well, we nourish our bodies with real food, but we nourish our souls and our ancestry and our people and the time that we live in. We nourish those things through ritual. But they both are made. They both are made, and that's the key point.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
And especially, that totally makes sense. And I like the analogy with food, because we can also eat as if it means nothing. Right?
Bingo.
We can just put it into our bodies and maybe nourish our bodies if it's somewhat healthy, but we won't really nourish our souls until we really give it some meaning and appreciate what we have in front of us, and make kind of a ritual out of everyday food intake, if we want to call it like that. That's not a whole different world.
Not kind of a ritual, to make a ritual. And I think that's the difference, is that, when you open your fridge and there's food there, do you take that for granted?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you have food on your plate, do you take that for granted? And really, that's the question is, you know, is this moment meaningful?
Yeah.
Or is it just another moment in your day where more important things need to happen? And this is just fuel to keep you going forward. And who cares where it came from? Or who cares if I have it? Or who cares?
Mm.
You know, and that's the question. And that's the line. You can either pivot towards it being meaningful or pivot towards it not mattering at all.
Mm-hmm.
But the consequence of it not mattering is that then it trickles out into bigger things not mattering. So for example, you know, let's talk about, I wrote a chapter in the book on loss of a pet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've lost a variety of dogs in my life, you know, and life can just move on. You know, I get emails and I have phone calls and I have bills to pay and I have groceries to get. And, you know, life just moves on. It doesn't care about your grief. Right. So, but the question is, you're grieving. You loved this animal.
Yeah.
So can you pause from the incessant insanity of your day to turn towards this moment and say, this matters. This is meaningful. I miss this dog or cat or whoever, whatever animal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do something. I'm going to make something. I'm going to make a moment to mark this ending because my heart's grieving and I need to see it in front of me. So in the book, one of the rituals I encourage, I call this book a ritual recipe book, like a cookbook. And I've got over 75 recipes in there. And just like any recipe, you can, you know, substitute salt and sugar. And, you know, if you're allergic to this or that, I encourage my reader to play, but I set out the recipe, the structure. And one of the recipes here, I have this right now from my last dog. I don't know if your listeners are watching or just listening, but this is a leash from my last dog, Rudy.
Mm-hmm.
And when she died, this leash was just sitting by the front door. This was a routine. This was a daily routine, walking my dog every day for 16 years. We walked on this leash, and that had a lot of purpose. And then one day this leash had no purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It just sat by the front door. My heart was totally broken. Right. And my whole life was changed. Like I went on a walk twice a day. I fed this dog. I loved this dog. I bathed this dog. And then one day she was gone. And I was having trouble pivoting with all the change. My life changed in one day. So I took her leash and I cut it. And I wore this like a ribbon over my heart. In my tradition, in my Jewish tradition, when people die, we tear clothing to mark the loss, or we wear like teared ribbons over our heart. And so I took her leash and I cut it and I wore it for a year over my heart as a marking of me missing this dog. And now it lives on my altar, which is where I just pulled it from. But that's in the book, you know, to give people tools, real tools to make meaning from these moments that change us.
And why is that so important? Especially, I mean, you mentioned the loss of a dog, people losing loved ones, people losing jobs, there's so many reasons to grieve something. And what I like about your book is you have a certain chapter on each of that. Like there is rituals for loss, there is rituals for different kind of celebrations, for the birth of a child, new beginnings. Why is it so important to mark those changes in a very conscious way, like you did with the leash of your dog?
Yeah. Well, so let me back up with the question for a minute. So the book starts off, the introduction to the book starts off with the story of my mom. My mom has dementia and she's currently in a memory care facility. And the question of the book, the entire introduction of the book starts off with the question, what do you do the day that your mother forgets your name? Because that happened to me.
That happened last year.
Yeah. And it was a very monumental moment. Very monumental. And my life just tried to carry on, like I hung up the phone from her and I had emails to do and bills to pay and all that stuff, and yet my heart was broken. Then I needed to do something. And, this real line between like, just pretend like nothing happened or stop my world because something happened. So, and of course, because I'm a ritualist, like I chose to pivot towards the ritual. Something happened. And then you could find out what happened by reading my book. However, the second section of the introductions asks the question, if it's possible for an individual to lose their memory, is it possible for a culture to lose its memory? And so you ask the question, why are rituals important? And they're important because if we don't do them, we forget. The whole entire book rests on the question, what happens when you stop doing things to remember? Have you heard of the book Braiding Sweetgrass?
No.
Robin Wall Commemorer. This is an excellent book, amazing book. Definitely check it out. She's an indigenous person who lives in California, and she's essentially a scientist and an indigenous plant medicine practitioner. And she says in the book, our elders tell us that ceremony is our way to remember how to remember. Ceremony is a way that we remember how to remember. Because she doesn't say this is me now, because forgetting is human. We all forget all the time. That's normal. But we don't have many of us don't have these mechanisms to remember. To remember what? To remember that our life is important, that it's sacred, that we're connected, that we matter, that we're changing, that we belong. I mean, fill in the blank.
Yes.
But we forget all of the time.
Is that what happens on a big scale to cultures all around the world? And I'm not just talking about indigenous cultures where there's obviously a lot of different factors why they are losing their cultures, but also to Western cultures, that we are so distracted in our modern societies. There's so much information overload that forgetting becomes a necessity because it's so overwhelming to remember. And then by not having those rituals and ceremonies and ways of remembering, we actually forget what really is meaningful, we forget what really needs to be remembered in order to reach a certain depth in our life.
I would say forgetting isn't a necessity. Forgetting is a consequence of not having these mechanisms to remember. So I started off the conversation saying that I come from a Jewish culture. And inside of the book, there's I'm pulling from my culture a lot in this book. I'm standing on the shoulders of my culture. I've learned from my own culture, and I'm also reimagining my culture for a modern audience. And we have many, many ways, and I've been taught this since I was a baby. We have many, many ways of remembering throughout the year, for instance. We have these mechanisms through the year and also through the day. We have these mechanisms, these rituals that we do that help us reorient to where we are and to who we are, because we forget. So suddenly the year comes and we're suddenly in, April, and we have this holiday that basically says, now's the time to talk about slavery and liberation. The whole world's the Northern Hemisphere is doing it, which is where my people are from. The whole ground is trying, all the sprouts are trying to liberate themselves from the ground. Everything's trying to burst through and grow. And my people have stories of being enslaved and being liberated. And so now there's this mechanism, this ritual that we do every year that says, so now what about you? Where are you enslaved? Where are you chained up? Where are you subjugated? And how can you free yourself? How can you liberate yourself from this time? What needs to clear away? What needs to go away so that you can come into this new season freer? And we have these mechanisms. My culture has these mechanisms that remind us, pay attention. This is happening right now, collectively. Pay attention. So, we have this during the day too. So I've borrowed, I've reimagined, I've repurposed, I've redeemed some of these rituals and have used my imagination and my, artistic capacities to bring in new rituals for a new audience, for a modern audience. You don't have to be Jewish to use them. You don't even have to be religious or necessarily even spiritual. I'm bringing these into like corporations to mark these moments. But they're necessary because if we don't do them, we forget. Do you know, by the way, just to bring a metaphor in, have you heard of the word Karen, Cairn, a Karen of stones? No. So if you're going to hike, if you go on a hike and you see a pile of stones.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. That's called a Cairn. And that basically says, don't keep going straight, turn here. Whenever you see that, someone came before you, piled a bunch of rocks because they went straight and said, it's not good. You can't, maybe there's like a cliff there. Don't keep going this way, turn. This is exactly what ritual does. Don't keep going forward in your life. Turn or return here. There are markers, because if we keep going like everything's normal or like I'm the same person or nothing's changed, then we get lost. So the Karen, the pile of stones or ritual helps us turn and says, you're not the same person that you were. So for instance, I interviewed a lot of people for this book. And there's a chapter on, I have interviewed hundreds, and there's a chapter on retirement. I interviewed this woman who said she was waking up every day. She retired, and after her retirement for 2 years, she was waking up every day at 5 a.m., panicked, because she thought she owed work. Right? And so her psyche thought that she was still on the same path. She had nothing that told her psyche that she turned. Yeah. She's not working anymore. She's retired. She needed a ritual to help her psyche and her soul understand you're no longer the same person anymore. Life has turned. You have to figure out who you are now.
Yeah. Thank you very much for explaining that. I think that's a very good way of explaining why it's so important. And it reminds me of birthday parties. I usually love to have birthday parties, invite over friends. I mean, who doesn't, right? But then maybe, and this has been an experience for many people during COVID, there were no birthday parties, or at least in a very, very small scale, and many people couldn't really celebrate. And what I feel is that when I don't celebrate my birthday, really, I forget that I'm now like 36, like 35, and not 34 anymore. And it takes much longer to integrate the matter of fact that you now turned 1 year older.
Yep.
So that's, I think, another explanation of why we need those markings. And also what I feel, especially when it comes to celebration, let's say you want to celebrate a success. There is a success in your life that you want to celebrate. And if you don't celebrate it, part of that energy that comes from that success, from that achievement, is not being integrated, is not being fully there. It's just somewhere stuck, it seems.
Here's a great story.
Yeah.
Here's a great story about that. So I have a good friend who works for an amazing organization that basically protects water in California. And she works with a lot of different corporations to help them be more water conscious. And she worked on a project, her and her team worked on a project for 3 years. 3 years. That's longer than this book, than it took me to write this book, right? They wrote, I think, 1,900 pages for this grant. 3 years, 1,900 pages. That's not a small accomplishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
They handed in the grant. The next day, her boss treated it like it was just the same day. And no, they did not, as a team, as an office, mark that moment. And so what do you think the people working on that team felt the next day? They felt disempowered. They felt disoriented. They felt like something was really missing because there was no celebration. There was nothing to mark like this. We did it. We almost didn't do it. This was almost impossible, but we did it. We got here. And so that's this is like what I'm advocating for, both in businesses, in communities, and with individuals, is you get to a moment, don't act like it's not, like nothing happened. This is a big deal. You woke up this morning. That's a big deal. How can you mark that?
Beautiful. It's almost like, or maybe it's exactly that. It comes to mind. So you put out a wish, and that wish comes true. If you don't celebrate it, if there's no ritual that adds meaning to that wish coming true, the universe, life, God, whatever you want to call it, that's kind of behind the scenes working in its mysterious ways, that you met the right people at the right time, that this actually happened. And it won't happen again so quickly, because it's like you're not seeing it, you're not celebrating it, you're not, expressing gratitude and appreciation for the gift of life that you receive. And as you put it right now, every morning you wake up is a gift. Every food you get on your plate is a gift. Every breath you're allowed to inhale is a gift, or can be understood as a gift.
It has to be, exactly. It's a pivoting towards, right? So you can see it as a gift or not. And there's real consequences in not seeing it as a gift. And there's real consequences in seeing it as a gift, but it really depends on your pivoting.
Yeah.
If you pivot towards the gift as much as you can, then you start to really see everything that's before you as something that has been given. Therefore, you can practice receiving. And then you could also practice giving. Because as you may or may not know, what makes a gift is that it has to be received and given away. It has to be in motion, aka reciprocity. Gifts are reciprocal, meaning you can't just keep it and take it and not give it again. So the practice is to continue to receive the gift of life, even if that's hard. I have a whole chapter in the book on receiving a diagnosis, marking that moment. That's a hard one. You get.
How can you understand that as a gift?
It's not understanding the diagnosis as a gift. It's understanding your life as a gift in the face of a diagnosis.
Right.
So it's your life changed. You're not, you receive a diagnosis. I'm not sure if you have, but you receive a diagnosis. The person that you were when you walked into the doctor's office is not the same person when you leave the doctor's office. Right. And the doctors are so focused on the logistics and the strategy, whatever you've been diagnosed with, the whole mechanism goes into high gear to get, you well. That oftentimes there's absolutely nothing that acknowledges you've changed. In 10 minutes, your whole life has changed. What are you doing to acknowledge that change?
Can you help?
There's a lot of emotion that comes with that change. There's a lot of questions that come with that change. And they need space to process it.
Can you give
What
us
were
an
you saying?
example? Can you give us an example of how a ritual could look like when you're faced with such a diagnosis to mark that change?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll give you a relatively simple one. This one is in the book, and it just requires you to essentially go outside and lay down on the earth. And I walk my reader through, I think, 4 different motions: earth, air, warmth of the body, and water in your body. And essentially asking the ritual is asking the reader or the participant to slow down and to feel their connectedness to the elements in that moment. And the ritual actually came from, I interviewed a doctor. And this physician basically said, "Oh, I've given many, many diagnoses." And she said, "What happens in that process is my patients feel suffocating, like they're suffocating. The walls are closing in on them, and they can't breathe." And she said, and I said, "What would you want a ritual to look like?" And she said, "I would want them to feel like there's fresh air coming in, that there's spaciousness."
Mm-hmm.
So the ritual that I created is basically, I think it's called earth and sky. I'll look it up in a second, but it's essentially creating a space for them to feel connected, to feel spacious, to slow down time, and to, in some ways, anchor themselves back into their world that has just changed in an instant.
Mm-hmm.
So here we go. It's called the Earth and Sky Ritual.
Yeah.
The Earth and Sky Ritual. Do you want me to read from it a bit?
Sure. Yes, please give us an example on that one.
Yeah. It says, I'll read just the last part.
Yeah.
Diagnosis pushes you into a totally new landscape. Without realizing it, the person you were when you woke up that morning, when you poured your coffee and tied your shoes, is no longer the person you are. Now you are different. You are a new person with new circumstances, new fears, new emotions, and there's barely any chance to say goodbye to the person you knew yourself to be before the diagnosis. In a way, the dominant culture and medical industry just expects you to move forward without understanding the need to say goodbye to the life you had before and hello to the new life you've been now dealt. A moment to surrender and reorient. Moments like this need an emergency brake. What would it look like if, amid the deluge that is a diagnosis, you attempted to slow down and mark this moment? Doing something that brings everything to a halt to help breathe space back into the room. Something that, after the wind has been knocked out of you, brings you back to your body, to your heart, and to the present moment.
Beautiful. Thank you for this sample of your book. I feel very touched by those words because I think it applies to so many different situations in life, not just being faced with a diagnosis, but literally it helps so much accepting that life is change. Life itself means change every single moment. Mm-hmm. Like our bodies are not the same as they were like 1 second ago. Mm-hmm. Millions of cells have renewed in the past couple of seconds, even since we started our interview. So many things have changed, and rituals, it seems to me, really help us to connect to that universal truth, to that absolute principle that everything changes in every moment, and everything we can do or to add meaning to that and to make meaning of that, as you said, is to connect to that universal truth, embrace it, and going with it instead of resisting it. And rituals help us with that.
They are one of the fundamental tools we have as humans, cross-culturally.
Amazing, especially because I feel it has been here for so many thousands of years, but we have forgotten to use them in our modern cultures.
Yeah, I mean, the modern culture is relatively new on the scene and acts relatively like a child.
Yeah.
Mature cultures understand the need to remember, but children, adults understand and elders understand the need to remember what's important. Kids don't. They don't care. Adolescents don't really care. They have to be taught. So this is, ritual is the realm of mature adult culture and a mature adult person. Kids don't, and for the most part, they have to be taught the importance of ritual and ceremony and meaning making.
Yeah.
Listen, we're going into some really transformative times globally. You're talking about change. I mean, you ain't seen nothing yet. So we're about to really watch our worlds change. I mean, we just started last year, think about your life pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Things have changed. This is just the beginning. So it's really important to get your tool belt on and to have things in your world that helps you adapt and orient to change. So this is what, talk about timing. This is why I wrote this book. I wrote this book on the heels of change, by the way. My whole life fell apart at the beginning of the pandemic. My mother lost her mind. My grandmother got COVID and was in the ER. I lost 100% of my income in a week, the pandemic. So talk about, being in the cusp of change. And yet I have, thank God, skills. So, I had my own rituals to keep me sane during an insane time and helped keep me moving forward and keeping faith and staying healthy and trying to understand, when the ground falls out from under you, how do you stay healthy and connected? And so the rituals really helped me. And it wasn't just about, rituals to help me feel good. Sometimes my rituals help me express grief and help me really cry out questions that had no answers. And they helped me mark that change so that I could, continue on with my life and not feel like I was not tending to that, So that ritual, for instance, like every day of writing, I went to the sea every morning. Every morning I went to the sea and I made a little bit of, I make altars out of nature. So I made a little something out of the things I collected at the edge of the sea. And I asked my questions and I gave my thanks. And then I went and checked after that ritual, I would check my phone and there'd be emergencies on the phone, or I checked the news and there'd be emergencies in the news. The world was spinning and burning and crazy, but that one ritual every morning kept me sane. I'm speaking from experience.
Yes. And you express it with your art since many years. Morning Altars is one of your heart projects on Instagram. I'll put it in the show notes as well. And there's beautiful altars and sacred geometry and things you find in nature, and you put it together in such a nice way. Can you share with us a little bit what's going on inside of you? What does that connection feel like to make meaning with your hands and then make it look so beautiful?
So that practice, morning altars, also began in a time of massive change in my life. My father passed away in 2011, and I went through a very significant breakup with a partner, and my world was completely wrecked. I really was so destroyed by so much death and loss in that year. All I had at the time, I adopted my dad's dog, who we spoke about, and we would go on these walks. I would be, my head would be down. I would be in my mind thinking and trying to process the loss is what I was trying to do. Along the way, I found beautiful bits and pieces of nature leaves and berries and, stones and whatnot. And basically found my way one day to the top of this hill, sat down under a tree, and just started to make art out of the nature that I found. But what I was really doing is I was using my hands to put the pieces of nature into some kind of order, some kind of symmetry, because things internally were so disordered that I needed to see order in front of me to understand order back into my life. I needed to remember that there was such a thing as order. Mm-hmm. And so this practice, started off a very personal ritual of trying to process my grief and loss. And then somehow or other, because I kept putting it out into the world, it took form and started to spread around the world like seeds. And so, tens of thousands of people now have made the same kind of nature altars out of places they live, and for the reasons that they needed to make it, a death, a birth, a divorce, a celebration. And then they would send it back to me on Instagram. And so this movement started of essentially making altars and dedicating them to different parts of our life. And so when I wrote this new book, Hello, Goodbye, I'm standing on the shoulders of that practice that I've been doing for 10 years and helping tens of thousands of people. And now this new book is great. Earth altars are one way of marking these moments. What are others? And I've created, 75 different ways, not just creating altars, but that's the origin of that. And it came from a time in my life where I was in need.
I feel that there's many people out there now that want to read your book right away. I can highly recommend it. I have not come through everything of it, and I'm super excited to read through all the rituals that you're sharing within. But could you give us maybe one more teaser, one more hint, there's one more question that I feel can be of help to people who feel like, okay, let's create more rituals in my life. And not just giving the answer, yes, just go read my book. But what is it that you need to take care of? What are kind of the essentials, the most essential advice you could give to someone who has not really been in touch with rituals so far in his life, but feels like, yes, I want to explore that more. How can I make more rituals in my life? What's important?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, that's the perfect audience for this book. This book I call it's written for people who are ritual curious, is what I call it. If you're ritual curious, if you don't really have a relationship with ritual, this book's for you. This is a recipe book that you should not read from start to finish. You should keep it on your shelf, and when something happens, pull it off. Like you would a cookbook. You don't have a cookbook at the edge of your bed. You have a cookbook on your shelf that when you want to make a meal, you use it. So this book is the same thing. It's a companion and it's a resource book for people when they really need it. That's number one. And it's appropriate for people who are, as I said, new to ritual. Now, you mentioned before, I'll give you another example, another taste of a ritual. You mentioned before birthdays. So I have a whole chapter in the book on rituals for a birthday. And it's not what you think. The ritual in the book is not, it's not like throwing yourself a party. Instead, the ritual in the book is creating something to acknowledge all of the things, all of the people that give you your life. And so I walk you through a ritual in the book where you get to make something. I don't want to give it totally away, where you get to make something and ask questions about all of the many different people, animals, places, jobs, all the different aspects that give you your life. Because on your birthday, it's sometimes only about you. But who gives you your life? What do you need to remember on your birthday? And so the ritual is a real way to, make your birthday more meaningful And remember that your life is connected to many, many, many lives.
Mm. I love that.
That's just another taste of a ritual.
I love that. So a ritual doesn't have to be on a regular basis. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, but there are many rituals, especially in the book, that are on a regular basis. The etymology of the word ritual means to count, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But the way I see it is counting could be a little bit more like how a dancer counts or a musician counts, like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a way of counting too, and that's more akin to how ritual is, which it's repetitive for the most part, and it keeps you in sync. It keeps you in rhythm. I don't know if do you play an instrument?
Yes, I play the
Do you
guitar.
play music? Okay, so you know the importance of counting.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're playing an instrument and you're not counting, it's really easy to get lost. The counting keeps you in sync. Ritual does the same thing. It keeps us in sync with the important moments of our lives. It keeps us in the rhythm of our lives.
Wow, that's a very beautiful way to put it. Thank you. Thank you, Day. Let me ask you one more question to conclude this very inspiring interview. So if more and more people are waking up to that, what you just shared, let's say your book is being sold 1 billion times. Let's just dream big.
Amen.
You know? Yeah. Amen. So the whole world is creating more and more rituals and making meaning and creating meaning in their lives. What is your big vision of how would that change the world? How would that change the whole process of the change of humanity that we're going through right now? What is your big vision on that one?
I mean, the question really is, how has it been and how could it be? How has it been? Meaning, could it be that there was a time on this planet where the majority of people were ritual literate? Meaning they came from a culture and a place where ritual was an essential thread in the tapestry of their culture. Could that have been? And therefore, could it be that could also be the case, that we return to a time where a majority of the people on this earth became ritual literate and understood the importance of marking these moments of our lives, marking the moments in time where life inevitably changes, and that we don't have to feel so lost and unresourced and scattered, but that we can have these mechanisms that bring us back together as a people, that bring us back together as families, that bring us back together with the places that we live and the time that we're in, and allow us to feel like we can change as our life changes. And so, I asked the question, how has it been? How could it be? And then the third question, which I didn't name, is how is it now? And how is it now is it's pretty bleak. We're in a culture, I heard the term I'm in the States. I heard the term the United States of amnesia. That's a term I've heard before. The United States of forgetting. We're in a massive time of forgetting. I just watched the movie Don't Look Up. Did you see that?
Yes, it's a great movie. I love it.
Yeah. So the whole thing is something's happening. But the whole culture wants distraction and forgetting. It's a real poignant movie because it's about people trying to acknowledge what's happening. So if you ask me the question, if 1 billion people read my book, what would I want? I would want people to turn towards what's happening and to feel it, to acknowledge it, to be witnessed in it, and to make meaning and beauty with it, even and especially the grief.
Thank you for those very, very encouraging, inspiring, and powerful words at the end of our interview. Hey Schildkret, thank you so much for this conversation.
You're welcome.
I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Wish you all the best with your book. May it be read by 1 billion readers.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.